I asked them specifically what their goals were, and they said they wanted to learn to fly so that they could go fly for Saudia. For people coming from that part of the country, Saudia would be the premier airline of the Middle East.
Why haven't we read about this in America's so-called free press? Why are we still accepting at face value the word of a man of such clearly dubious character? Deckers, for example, was recently forced to settle a lawsuit for sexual harassment filed by an 18-year-old girl. A former employee, it turns out she was also the Huffman employee who filed the terrorist error-filled INS paperwork. Remember, to get the visas that came back 6 months to the day after the attack? Perhaps she can be forgiven her mistakes, given that she was at that same time being distracted by the pawings of a middle-aged Dutch creep. You're aware of the numerous allegations of sexual harassment, for example.
Yeah, I hear that. I mean, that's rumors around the airport. Airport's smaller community. It's like a small microcosm of society. Most airports are. And yeah, people, women leave, and down there, I've heard that there's been problems down there.
So a man who gets his kicks by sticking broom handles up the backs of the dresses of 18-year-old girls who worked for him was invited to testify before the Congress of the United States of America on preventing future terrorist attacks. Apparently no one thought to question him about what role he may have played or how he may have facilitated the events of September 11th. Why not? As we've just seen, it's not because he has such a sterling character. What then? Why is Rudy Deckers being protected, and by whom? To understand what follows, it helps to recall first just a little U.S. history. Back in the bad old days of the Cold War, the largest airline in the entire world belonged to just one client, the CIA. The agency operated its airline under literally hundreds of names, constantly shuffled. When CIA Director Helms ordered an inventory of the planes one time, he was told no accounting could ever be anything like totally accurate because of the complexity of the scheme. But in the public revulsion over the excesses of the CIA after Watergate, the agency was forced to divest itself of its air carriers. Supposedly. But something like it still goes on today. Take a look at Florida Air. At the same time that Rudy Deckers was getting humiliating coverage as a deadbeat in the local newspaper, he was also launching a commuter airline. There aren't many people behind on their rent who have the luxury to think about new airlines now, are there? Deckers had a partner in Washington State. His name was Richard Bulkey. He owned Harbor Air, called the Navy's airline because it serviced the big Whidbey Naval Air Station in Oak Harbor, Washington. Deckers entered a venture with a partner who was also at the same time participating in the massive mob-led looting of pension funds in Portland, Oregon. Altogether, over $350 million was missing. And they not only got away with it, but they even pretty much kept it out of the papers, except the local press, which just claimed to be sort of puzzled by it all. Deckers' partner Richard Bulkey was pretty fortunate too. He gave him $26 million to build this high-rise condominium project that only cost $12 million. Where do you go to apply for that kind of work? Portland reporter Eric Mason was intrigued by the Bulkey-Deckers connection too. When he went to interview Bulkey, Bulkey told him he was someone else.
It's interesting, the first, conversation that I had with him, he denied being Richard Bulkey. I recognized him from the description I had gotten. I said, Mr. Bulkey, can I get an interview with you? And he said, Mr. Bulkey isn't here. And then when I saw him again, I said, Mr. Bulkey, I think you really need to speak to me. I've got some important questions for you. He finally said, okay, come on upstairs.
Mason was interested in Bulkey for pretty much the same reasons we were.
The financing that had gone between Mr. Bulkey and Florida Air, which was a sister operation to the flight training center which trained Mohammed Atta.
Remember what we said at the start of the show? That this was a story about legends? That your legend is your cover story, the lie that holds together long enough to let you slip away. Well, oddly enough, Richard Bulkey's condo project in Portland, Oregon, it's called Legends. Rudy Deckers might be involved in a lot of aviation-related businesses that don't make any business sense, but so is his partner Richard Bulkey.
Richard Bulkey's former employees always wondered what the aviation business was really doing. From the beginning, they felt as though the finances flowed from the real estate holdings and the retirement home into this aviation company, and that there was really no way this aviation company was really making money. So the question about what this aviation company was really all about, that still remains to be seen.
When things don't make business sense, sometimes it's because they do make sense, just in some other way.
It started out of here, which was a Decker, a Hilliard thing, which again just never made sense. That airline startup thing was the chances of that working were, and we joked about it. In fact, it was such a joke around here at the airport. It was a thing where, I joked around. I said, "Oh yeah, they're going to start an airline." I said, "I'm working on a shuttle launch facility right next door here."
We are looking, remember, for evidence of the global networks which authorities said must have been aiding the terrorists while they were in this country.
He had received financing from capital consultants. And capital consultants, the folks that are the head of the financial officers of capital consultants, have now been indicted on a number of charges, including fraud. Some have labeled it a Ponzi scheme. I think the prosecutors in this case have made the case, at least to a grand jury, to go forward with indictments, that there was fraud going on. And you have to ask yourself, in this huge financial holdings company, where did all this money go? You have to ask yourself, how much money can you lose and not have anything to show for it?
Another grateful recipient of millions of dollars of the pension fund money was Alvin Malnick, whom Reader's Digest once called Meyer Lansky's heir as head of organized crime. And as global networks go, they don't get much bigger than that. But it's not Malnick's gangster ties that make your jaw drop. It's his connection with the Saudi royal family. A Jewish gangster, Alvin Malnick's son, is married to the daughter of Prince Turki, a leading prince of the Saudi Arabia kingdom's founding family, who lived in this swank Miami condo project, the cricket club, at Malnick's invitation. The Saudi prince not only blessed the marriage, but regularly works with the U.S. organized crime associates. One knowledgeable observer told us he would frequently send his private 747 to Florida to pick up Malnick and his associates so they could conduct business on the plane away from prying eyes. Malnick also owns what law enforcement sources call the biggest mob hangout south of New Jersey, the Forge, which attracts what one investigator called men with big cigars and women with tiny resumes. In front of the Senate Banking Committee hearings about the terrorist money trail in the aftermath of the September 11th disaster, Assistant Attorney General Michael Chertoff said, "Frankly, we can't differentiate between terrorism and organized crime and drug dealing." Rudy Deckers, it seems, has partners who are in business with the mob. And the mob is a global network. And the mob traffics in heroin, which gives them something pretty big in common with Osama bin Laden's organization, believed to derive much of its funding from the heroin and opium trade in Afghanistan. But there's yet another global network which often works together with the mob, which has its fingerprints all over the Rudy Deckers story. Take Rudy Deckers Airlines Florida Air, for example. Just like the CIA's airline back in the 60s and 70s operated under hundreds of names, Deckers Airline does too. Florida Air really isn't Florida Air, for example. It's Sunrise Airlines of Las Vegas, doing business as Florida Air. But then Sunrise Airlines of Las Vegas isn't really Sunrise Airlines either. It's Express Air of Phoenix, doing business as Sunrise Airlines. Somebody real high in the U.S. government must have loved these guys, because they were getting more than $3 million a year from the U.S. government itself in something called the Essential Air Service Program in the Department of Transportation to run flights in rural Arizona. But it gets better. The plane they flew the service in was donated to them for just $1 a year by the city of Show Low, Arizona, which obligingly purchased it for them after the city fathers approved a $2 million bond issue. But it gets better yet. After being the recipient of all that government money, Rudy Deckers' company didn't even operate the flights. It went bankrupt instead. Deadbeat Rudy Deckers was starting an airline. And how's this for an ironic twist? Who should line up to provide him with his very first celebrity endorsement? But Florida Secretary of State Katherine Harris. We all remember her. At this point, we wondered, is it just us? Did anyone else see what we were seeing? Well, yes. There is a lot of uneasiness about Rudy Deckers in Venice, Florida, especially among people who know him.
I think in a lot of ways he's very ambitious. To what extent he would go to succeed, I don't know his character well enough to comment on it.